Candice, thank you so much for taking time to be with us today and for helping us to address the concerns that we have with the Association of Certified Biblical Counselors conference that's taking place this week. And you've had a lot of experience, both personally and in the work you do, with the intersection of Christianity and sexuality. And so I'd love for you just to take a few minutes to tell us a little bit about your background and your journey as you've worked through your own sexual orientation and your faith, and why you've been compelled to start this ministry and practice called a Christian Closet.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you, Brandon.
Yeah.
You know, I grew up in the church, have so many fond memories of Sunday school, and even as a young child, enjoyed the, quote unquote adult service. There was something about like the Spirit of God and the people that I got to interact with that felt safe and good. And so I grew up with such a positive experience in church. Friends, community we had built in our church. So it was really a natural move for me with go to college to go to a Bible college. I wanted to be a therapist, but I also desperately wanted to learn the Bible more. Growing up, I had spent time going on missions trips and leading Bible studies even in my high school. And so, working at churches and working in the youth group and all of that. So I went to Chicago to the Moody Bible Institute, and it was a really kind of crazy, what felt like a crazy, very tormented time for me, because I went in really believing myself to be straight. I'd had attraction for guys, and I really had no context for this thing that one, to be attracted to someone of the same gender. I didn't know any gay people. There wasn't anything in the media. It just wasn't what it was today. And so it wasn't a concept that was in my mind. It was like as if I, went to bed straight one night, hoping that like a young moody guy would sweep my feet, to waking up totally attracted to, and huge crush on my friend who was another girl. Talk about shocking.
Yeah, totally.
Horrifying. I didn't know what it was. I felt odd and weird, and so it was a very, very painful time of, I started going to therapy actually there on campus, and trying to figure out really what was wrong with me. What kind of wounding did I have that I was this good, faithful, straight Christian, that all of a sudden, in what felt like a blink of an eye, I was this horrible, bad, sinful, shameful person. That led me into years of depression, years of anxiety, years spent in therapy, years on medications. It was a really dark time. I remember constantly praying for God to take my life. I didn't believe in suicide, so that wasn't an option for me. But the only thing that made sense was that God would kill me, because in my mind it was like the most two opposite things that could possibly be: Christianity and a same-sex attraction. They didn't work, and yet somehow they were both in me, and neither of them were going away. So death seemed to be the only hope. I am now obviously so grateful that I'm still alive, and that my journey didn't end there. But there were really a lot of dark years. Kind of fast forward to graduate school, even though I was still, deeply struggling, I decided, okay, I'm going to, study psychology and go to graduate school. And I still my faith was still very important to me, so I decided to do that at a seminary. And while there, about a year into my journey, met who's now my wife, Crystal, and I fell in love with her. And the falling in love process was also very painful because I thought, oh God, no, this is horrible. This horrible thing is getting stronger.
Yeah.
And then we shared our first kiss. And however long a first kiss is, I don't know, a second, 2 seconds. It was like this almost dream state where I knew, oh my gosh, like somehow I had been wrong about what God must feel about homosexuality, because I knew what the conviction of the Holy Spirit felt like. I very much had that in my life growing up, and was connected to God. I knew that the Spirit of God was in my life, and when her and I kissed, I felt peace. And I hadn't had that peace probably since the day that I was attracted to that friend in college. And so in that moment, I thought, I don't know what the Bible really, like if I would have studied the Bible more than I already had, what would I find? I don't know that answer yet, but what I do know is that the Spirit of God is saying that this is good and okay, and that this is blessed. It totally changed my life. To go through that journey, I began to, study the Bible in even more detail than just the surface reading, and was pleasantly and excitedly surprised to see, oh wow, there's actually lots of ways to interpret these proper passages. That combined with this personal experience, I got off my antidepressants, I got off my anti-anxiety, I completed my time in therapy, and my life began to thrive. I was happy. I really, my personality changed. I thought I was a sad person, and I became outgoing. I thought I had social anxiety. That went away. I mean, my life really shifted and opened up. So a very long, hard, but exciting journey. And came out to my friends and family, and that was a whole other ball of wax. But I very much feel the blessing of God in my life. I'm now married with 2 kids. So I feel very, very fortunate.
Wow. What a beautiful story. I love your testimony of your journey through this. Is just so encouraging. To those of us who have had to reconcile faith and sexuality, so many of us have felt what you've felt, and so many people, I imagine, are going through that dark period right now, and just to be able to hear that you can actually come out on the other side with faith and your sexuality intact and thrive, that's just such an inspiring thing to hear.
I'm so glad. I'm so glad that is my true deep desire, that it gives hope to people.
Totally. And after you've gone through that entire process, you've been working for a few years now, at least, with walking through LGBT people that are in faith communities, trying to figure out how to reconcile faith and sexuality, and you've been doing that as a psychologist, as somebody who's counseling people. What would you say, so this conference that's happening this week, I don't think there's anybody speaking at the conference who has real credential in counseling and therapy and gender or sexuality. All of them look to be pastors and theologians, and they're instructing thousands of other pastors on how to counsel and walk through sexuality and gender identity with people in their congregations. And as both your story and mine, we know that bad counseling and bad pastoral direction and bad theology and preaching about this has a tremendous impact, a very tangible impact on the lives of LGBT people in these congregations. As somebody who's had this personal journey, but also done some significant study in these areas. What would you want to say to a group of pastors who are trying to figure out how to respond to LGBT people in their congregation? What kind of basic advice or instruction would you give to them?
Yeah. I think it's important to realize that absolutely we need their input. We need pastors. But we also need people that have studied the mind, and we need people who have studied our psychological worlds as well. So I have my master's in counseling psychology. I've been a therapist for over a decade, and I have been specializing in having this specialized practice for the last few years. And so it's kind of crazy that people are still considering homosexuality a disorder, because actually in 1973, so this is over 42 years ago, the American Psychiatric Association removed homosexuality from the DSM, which is, this ginormous book of disorders that all of us therapists look to in order to diagnose people. And so that was not a short time ago that all the heads of, psychology decided, actually, oh my gosh, there's only been studies to show how damaging reparative therapy is. There actually are there's no evidence or correlation that shows that reparative therapy works. In fact, there's only evidence to support that it leads to damage. I also want to say that, I believe that those pastors there, really, their hearts are for good. I believe that they want to help people. I believe that if they understood how deeply damaging reparative therapy was, that they wouldn't want to practice it. And so I hope that they can open their minds to say, gosh, if every psychological organization from, the American Association of Marriage and Therapy, Marriage and Family Therapists, to the American Medical Association, if every psychological organization has recognized that reparative therapy is harmful, maybe something's going on here. Maybe it really is. And I have found what's so harmful is that, when we enter therapy, we say something is wrong. And when that something can't be fixed, we then begin to assume that we are deeply marred. Who my soul is, who I totally am, is just the worst possible thing if I can't fix this thing in therapy. And that's what happens in reparative therapy, because you can't change an orientation. You can't change a straight orientation, and you can't change someone's orientation that's toward the same-sex attraction. So you go into therapy thinking, okay, I'm going to change this, and it doesn't change. And the only possible explanation is that you are completely messed up. And you're a freak, and there's something just intrinsically wrong with you. And that leads to shame, and it leads to self-hatred, which leads to depression, self-destructive behaviors, all kinds of harm. And I just don't see even a biblical model for it. So I just wanted to, really expand on their good intentions that I believe are there, to say, please recognize that this is harmful. Find other ways to help people through this. If I was a youth pastor and I had a young person come to me, I would say, one, God made you beautifully and wonderfully as you are, that this is not a mistake, and that just like it takes straight people time to figure out how they can faithfully live out their straight sexual orientation, how they can faithfully date people, how they can faithfully express their sexuality, how they can faithfully get married and all of those things, that it takes time to figure that out for a person who experiences same-sex attraction.
Mm.
So that answer won't come quickly, but that will take time and discernment, prayer, and all those kinds of things. But to have just to be gay or lesbian or transgender or bisexual, that in itself is not necessary.
Totally. Wow. And
Yeah.
well, first, thank you for that. And I just want to hit on just two things really quickly. One, from your everything you've learned and studied, and all of your experience in this field, you would absolutely affirm that orientation change isn't a possibility. It shouldn't be worked towards. Is that true?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. There is no proof. There isn't a study that exists because if there is a study that exists, the people that were in that study years later come out later saying, you know what, it actually isn't possible to change your orientation.
Totally.
And then personally experiencing, believe me, if you could change your orientation, I would have figured it out. And totally. so would many of my patients. And it just is a impossibility.
Yeah. And the other thing, I think for a lot of those of us in this Christian space, we know very little about how to address gender identity questions. And I'm not sure if you've addressed that a ton in your work, but I think a lot of people are really looking for resources and good places to go to or begin understanding the complexity of gender identity as kind of this transgender identity becomes more public with big public spokespeople like Caitlyn Jenner and other folks like that. I just think a lot of people are wondering in the religious world, where do we go to actually learn about this and understand the complexity of gender identity? And I was wondering if you had any resources or recommendations or any comments on people that are trying to figure this out.
Yeah, and in fact, I even included the transgender community when I said earlier, and to be clear that transgender people aren't always homosexual. Some transgender people are straight, so I want to definitely clarify about that.
Yeah.
And I would say a very similar thing, that transgender people are made beautifully and wonderfully. Gosh, I heard this statistic the other day that basically one, and I think it's like 1,100 babies born, medical professionals can't determine whether it's a female or male. And that even in nature we see the blowfish is, they start out male and then the most dominant male ends up turning into a female. So, we see this even in the reflection of nature. And then my mind kind of goes to maybe one of the verses people often use, like, men shouldn't dress as women, and, that whole thing. To be transgender is, let's say there's someone who's born male. It's not that he's a man dressing as a woman. It's that his identity is woman, is female. And so while he might have the genitalia of a man, that verse actually doesn't even apply to him, because everything else in his personhood says female. And so he actually is she. So she is dressing like a woman. Because the ideas of, it can easily get complicated, but ideas of male and female are really these things that we've created as society, and they can be really helpful and beautiful. They don't, but within, we also need to be flexible to say there's actually all these other people that aren't experiencing that their bodies match everything else in their world.
Totally.
And so support and love, because that can be a really confusing thing for someone to experience. this idea that their body doesn't match everything else in their emotional and psychological worlds. So
Totally.
As far as resources, we need them, really.
Yeah.
I don't know even many books to point people to.
Yeah, totally.
Except for that I've had the honor of journeying with lots of transgender people through being able to find ways that God blesses them in their life and they're happy and healthy, and it's really beautiful.
Yeah. That's awesome. Well, thank you so much for that. And thank you so much for taking time to be with me and for all the work that you've been doing, not only in your own journey, which is so inspirational, but to the many LGBT people that you get to interact with and help along their way as they reconcile these two very important parts of their identity, their faith and sexuality. So thank you so much, Candice. I really appreciate you and all that you're doing. And yeah, thanks for being with us.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It's a dream to get to do what I do, really. Yeah. So thanks, Brandon.
Yeah, thank you.